When I hear that the largest climbing gym in Texas is going to be opening in about a week and a half, it gets my attention because I'm always curious what people are doing, where we're headed as an industry, and very specifically, what can we learn and what can we see with how to set up a strategy to not only develop a project successfully, but also make it look amazing. And so we're going to talk about how to put a strategy together, what we might be able to learn from a project like Mesa Rim in Austin, which is opening very soon. So when I see things like this, everything we're looking at today is going to be from the internet because that way there's no copyright issues, at least on my end. We are also going to be looking at a variety of things from the posts from uh, them, as well as other sort of commentary and time lapse of construction. This is all intended to be positive. I can make critiques, but I'm going to be doing a series of these, and the intent is to be pointing out things that I think are positives, things that we can take away. And certainly when I talk with clients, there's a lot of talk about things we're trying to avoid or whatever. But in these videos, we're going to be talking about the positives. And so when we get into this, Mesa Rim, there's nice renderings. Initially it was supposed to be opening. I think they're a little behind where they had intended to be by their own admission. And, they're describing it as a hub for folks to explore climbing, yoga, fitness. We've all heard that before. I'm not sure what else we can say, but every single climbing gym is saying that. So I think there's an opportunity there to sort of yes, we want to be fitness focused in some ways, but to earlier conversations about gyms losing their soul, part of it is that we're all saying we're doing the same thing. I think there's an opportunity there. So here's some renderings from Entrepris. One thing I will say that Mesa Rim seems to do well is that their climbing walls are pretty uniform in color, and this is across the board because when you look at their website, so we're on the Austin, Texas page, but the wall itself has this very nice sort of gray color to it. You can see the Entrepris product, I think, is very good. It's got these edge protection pieces of metal for ropes to not sort of be rubbing off the corner textures. The one thing I will say, there's a lot going on in the geometry, and this reminds me in a lot of ways of European climbing walls. And so when I look at an image like this is Innsbruck, and a lot of the European gyms and some gyms in the States are these much more uniform colored walls. And there is a lot of geometry going on that you sort of can't see as well because it's all one color. And, when you see the shadowing in an image like this of the exterior walls, which their exterior walls are wild, how much of it they have. And my understanding actually is I think there's a relationship between the government and this facility because it's used as a training facility for the team. And different videos about the facility talk about that. But again, when we're talking strategy, that's part of the strategy is in who's going to pay for it. In the case of our project here, they're working with a group called Metis Capital out of Austin, and they describe themselves as Austin's bespoke commercial developer. And I think when you name something, you're giving an intent. And so, the word bespoke and commercial development don't go together that often from what I've seen, but I think it describes a developer who is, they're local, they're saying they're local. That means they're part of the community. And, it's very different than different developers have very different goals. Some are just looking to get a place rented, collect rent. Some are looking to hold property long term. Some people care about what's in a building. Some people don't care at all. And so again, it's just part of the team and the development strategy, who you're putting in what position, where's the money coming from? There's a lot of money out there. And so it's more about the strategy than the actual cash because you need partners in this. This is a team sport. And that's why, again, the development strategy for the whole project is so critical. One of the things we can see when we're looking at the construction cycling, though, is that they're getting this part of the slab on grade taken care of first. You've also got these machines digging, boring holes. You've also got, this is the board forming, and these are they're harder to see from far away, but there's basically carpentry work that needs to go into getting the site prepared for the concrete to come in. They get that portion poured first, and there's a reason for that coming up in a second. But it's getting concrete onto a site. It takes a lot of trucks, and so there have to be control joints, meaning gaps between where we know there might be movement. We're trying to create space for buildings to move and adjust, and so we just sort of scrubbed by it there. But if you look at this, this is a great image of there's a lot going on here. You can see a bunch of stuff that is probably thickened or coming through for different parts of the building. You can see this is the area that we just said they poured the slab first, and we can see that so this part of the slab here has already been poured. This part of the slab here, this whole green box here, sort of chamfered box, you can see there's a bunch of rebar going both ways. These are stirrups probably holding the rebar. So you've got the dirt, you've got whatever the bottom layer is, which is usually some sort of a plastic. And then you've got rebar that you ideally want to be sort of in the middle of the concrete. So if this is your concrete, you want the rebar to be in the middle of it. And so how do you do that? You use stirrups that effectively hold it up and float it so that they can keep the rebar in place while you do the work. And so the thing that is kind of interesting here is they're doing a hybrid prefab and on-site prefab construction system. So like what I mean by that is they've already poured this slab. And again, this is all getting at strategy. So why do we care about this? Because if you can build your building faster, cheaper, still get an amazing building out of it, why wouldn't you do it that way? Also, getting these things weathered in faster is a huge advantage because installing the climbing walls takes forever or takes a while. They actually do it pretty quick, but it still takes a while because it's big. It's a lot of stuff. It just takes time. And so in this case, what they're doing is they got part of the site prepared. So this sort of A part is ahead of this B part. And the reason they did that is because if you look at this is the same type of formwork that is going on the slab area that they haven't poured yet. And again, this is like a board that's whatever, about 12 inches high, maybe more. It's got a bunch of bracing that is temporary that's holding it in place. And so like, what is this? It looks like a lap pool or a series of these lap pools. And you can see they're prepping them to be like, what is this? They're doing this on top of the slab. And so that's a question. And the answer, as we look through it, and this is, you can now see that they have poured the other slab. I don't think that's a crack. And it sort of doesn't look like that much is going on. You can start seeing on this other slab, these look a lot like these. Although now you can't see the concrete because you're looking at a mesh of rebar. And so these sort of almost curbs between these things. It's like, what's going on here? You've got this. You can see the board work, the formwork, I should say, made of boards. Braced here, not removed yet, means this is still curing concrete. You can walk on it in a few days, but it takes 21 days to reach ultimate structural strength, which is why we do different testing, some immediately, some 21 days down the road, or whatever the case in the specification might be. So what's going on here? And again, we're looking at this from a strategic point of view. Why would you do this? The answer is, and again, you can see there's even more going on. Now we're at a point where those big sort of curbs, these guys that were over here are now not over there. In fact, look, what's this over here? So, and then even here, right? This is a better, closer view. You can see the bracing. You can see, this is interesting. You can see the rebar here. You can see the formwork. You can see that they're casting it onto the formwork. And I think these even might be texture. Now that I'm looking at it, it even kind of strikes me as that might be part of the finish. But even closer in the lower right here, you can see like these, like what are these? These are probably layouts for windows or openings. And this is probably getting a little more clear what's going on. So this is going to be an opening here. And what's going on here? They are pouring concrete on site for precast panels, but instead of trucking them in, they're actually pouring them on site. And so here in the lower right, you can see again, those are the openings that we had talked about them framing in. You can see all these poles. These are going to be bracing poles as this crane over here, which is a pretty big crane, is coming in to put everything in place. Why? So we'll talk about the crane in a minute. But one of the reasons why this is so strategically smart, and again, they're working with a developer here who, you know, there are just different interests between the climbing gym operator, the building owner, that kind of thing. And so really quick, I mean, in the span of, in reality, probably just a few days, look how much has happened. These pieces that were once laid down on their sides are now tilted into place. This is why we call these buildings tilt-up buildings. You know, you can see there was some water there. But these panels, I'm going to try to find it better. These panels are quite literally tilted up into place. This attachment on the crane on the upper left there, this is taking one point, which is, you know, structurally, that's what it's, you know, this wants to rotate, right? Like if you hang anything from a string, it wants to rotate. So what you do is you put a splitter like this on, and it allows you to grab from 2 points to keep the thing from wanting to rotate as much. And so what quite literally happens is that these things get tilted up into place. These are the ones that used to be right here. If you see now, there's no, you can't see like this thickened piece of concrete anymore over here. That is now tilted up into place. And after that, they put the bracing in. This happens where a lot of times you can even speed this up further by doing this offsite and trucking them in. These are particularly big. Mesa Rim is boasting, you know, 55-foot walls, I believe, things like that, which means it's very, very tall, you know, taller than the average bear, and or at least like in line with the average bear. And so here you can see that thickened panel that then is, and as I'm saying that, it may not be that direct, but either way, these things are being cast on site, which is a little unique, allowed to cure, tilted up into place. You can see these are not standard window locations. And so a lot of the time for a project like this, in terms of delivering it this way, is actually spent putting the carpentry work together. And then you pour the concrete pretty quickly, and then you let it cure. You can see some texture that was cast into the concrete, these sort of lines. But, you know, what they did was they left this big gap here. And, you know, it starts telling us what I always say, when you look at a building like this, you can tell pretty quickly if it has potential to be something interesting, because pretty quickly what happens is the rest of the bones start getting filled in. And so the steel starts coming in. You can see they're bringing in pieces strategically in order. So they're laying the steel down in sequence so that they can get it up into place quickly. And that is what is going to stabilize the building laterally, so you can take all these braces away. And so pretty quickly, again, you know, you go from, you know, in this, if we're looking at this whole timeline, or sorry, the time of the, sorry, if we treat this as a whole timeline, like a construction timeline, you know, the part from, you know, 0 up to where we are, you know, the construction stuff only started, in terms of going vertical, only really started around here, right? Like we were very quickly, you know, once it started going, yeah, so even later than I thought, right? That doesn't even really happen until a little later. And then by the time we get just a little further, like look at the amount of progress that has been made. And they're doing this in a very particular sequence so that they can stabilize everything. And what you also can see here are different brace frames. So these diagonals are transferring the lateral load through both tension and compression of structural members down into the ground. You can see another one here. See another one here. I don't know if there's another piece. Maybe it hasn't been installed. The location of these brace frames is incredibly important because they have to exist or they have to be taken care of in some way. Doing it with diagonals rather than moment connections, meaning squared off connections, where all of your rotation is handled at the joint, that's expensive. Doing it, cross bracing, diagonal bracing, a lot more efficient, a lot less material, a lot easier to deal with. That's why we do it that way. Again, we're talking about this strategically. How is this thing being put together in a way that allows us to get this thing open faster? We've got the design done. Let's get the doors open. Like why take more time? So you can see different sizes of steel here. Again, in my opinion, the bones of the building, the structure of the building is really where so much of the coordination, and I know for me, my focus is, because if you don't have the bones right, you're just sort of putting lipstick on something. And so, something not as nice. So we got to get the bones right. What they've done is you can see the little parapet going above the roof. They've got the metal decking, so the corrugated metal decking that goes on top of the steel. And that will be what then has insulation put on top of it, the roofing material, etc. So again, you still going here, still not much happening in the foreground. And then all of a sudden, now we can see mezzanines in the front area here starting to show up. And we can start to understand what's going on with the building. So we've got a mezzanine being put in here. We've got windows over here on the right side. And you can see these are these gray pieces in between the truck and us, the crane and us, are a much smaller crane, by the way. It looks, maybe not. That might, probably smaller. Bigger the crane, the more expensive. These are the joists that go create the floor, the open web bar joists. These are, this is a big piece of steel right here. How can you tell? It's deep, meaning vertically, and it's got a lot of stiffeners in it. So this piece of steel is doing a lot of work. Moving on a little bit. Whoa, just like that, right? Just like that, all of a sudden we've got the steel in the foreground. Totally different type of construction, as in there is no concrete infill. These panels over here, obviously not the same as this. These are, should be relatively simple connections. These are pretty tall columns, but the horizontal members are bracing. So keeping, these are not one, this is not one giant column that wants to bend as it, which is literally what they want to do. And the lateral stability is added with this diagonal like we had talked about. And whether or not, usually that would get transferred to the ground with a diagonal as well. So, whether or not that's getting transferred into a different type of connection, it doesn't, to be determined for me, at least. I'm sure they know. Why would you care about doing a more expensive type of connection rather than just, you've all probably seen buildings that have a lot of cross bracing. The issue with that is if you wanted to put like a door or a window there, there's two things. Either don't put that there. Don't put the bracing in a wall where you need doors and windows and stuff like that. Make it efficient. If you need to have a door or whatever, that's when you start dealing with moment connections and whatnot. So what's happening down here, I'm not totally sure. The fact that there's a horizontal member there and not over here is an indicator that something else is going on. You can also see that all of those open web bar joists that were on the ground previously, it's hard to see, but that's all up there. And you can tell because they were gray, which means they just had a different type of primer on them. So usually they would be primed. So going again a little further, you can start to see different things happening here. So what we're looking at here, and again, this is from a strategic point of view, we're about to get into something I think which is actually really important. So they are building the parapet to match the other parapet height. This panel goes all the way, one piece. These are little pieces of light gauge metal framing that are just, this is the roof, this is the structure, basically right there. And that goes up. Why do you need to go above the roof? If your steel is horizontal, it could be sloped, it could be horizontal. Either way, you need drainage, right? And you need some way for the water to get out of there. What you also can see in this case, and so parapets are there because you actually need usually a pretty good amount of depth depending on the length horizontally that you're going. These little things being framed out, we'll see in a minute. These are scuppers, which are basically like the overflow of a bathtub. And what you can see in the background here is what you're going to see in the foreground in a minute, which is more light gauge metal framing. You're installing each piece of that individually. And so what you can see on the inside before we get to the wall framing, so this is the metal decking, which is being laid out on top of the steel, perpendicular to the direction of the beams. So you've got your beams, you've got your metal decking spanning across. Again, none of this is rocket science. And then your concrete goes on top. That's all very typical. You can see bracing. You can see their sort of canopy going across. And as we keep going, more decking goes in. The building, as it gets covered in, it gets sort of darker. You can see this is a big opening because you can see the temporary, it's just like 2x4, just safety fencing, OSHA stuff. You can see the ladder up there. It's funny because this ladder up here, that's kind of getting at part of the issue with strategic construction, which is how do you access it? You can also see someone here who is on one of these reach lifts, which in the climbing industry we are very familiar with because this is a smaller one. We use these for setting routes sometimes, right? So to do anything up here, you need to get up there to be able to access it. To do anything on this roof, you need to be able to get up there. To put the plywood that is going to be the sheathing on the walls, you need to be able to get it there. How do you get it up there if it is, 40 feet in the air, 45 feet in the air, whatever it is? And like, not only in the air, that's one thing, but horizontally in the middle of a building. So the problem is often you can get things up and onto a roof, but then even lifting them in place, it can be laborious to have individual people having to do that. It's the kind of thing where when I look at construction like this, it's smart that they only did part of the exterior as light gauge metal framing. Again, we can see it. It's all being put in here. The interesting thing to me is like, I'm not sure, and here's some openings, but they did openings in the concrete as well. So, and I think there are different reasons why this could be happening, and I think a lot of it probably is just to keep the entry open, like more visually transparent, more glass, things like that. You can see the way that chamfered corner is working. Up here, though, is what we were just talking about, which is these are 4x8 sheets of plywood. This is scaffolding. So they literally had to bring a scaffolding onto the roof, and maybe they had, just a big bundle of plywood dropped onto the roof. But then you need to take it, bring it up the scaffolding and put it in place. Hold it there, attach it, yada, yada, yada. Layer, layer, layer. Time, not weathered in. Pretty close. You can see up here they're doing the roofing, this sort of roofing going over the edge there. This is a zip wall. Two ways you can tell. Number one, it's green, and that's sort of the brand. You can see the seam tapes. Seam tape, which is basically every piece of plywood butts into another or tonguing grooves together. Either way, and then tape is applied. I think this is all relatively new type of construction. I think it's going to be curious to see how well this stuff holds up. Again, down here, you can see there are windows and big openings. Window, opening by this thing. So here's a rather large scissor lift. You can see glasses going in. This is the roofing membrane, a light colored roof, which is smart for reflecting the sun. Again, these are sort of a lot of decisions being made here that are not overly expensive. Certainly like painting the outside. Does it need to be painted? Not really. Does it cost money to paint it? Yep. But is it that expensive? No. So, choosing, paint colors, like different paint colors there. But what I'm pointing out here is like, look at the amount of time it is taking to get through the framing, the sheathing, and we're not actually really that close to being finished with the siding here. So if we just let this roll, um, what you can start to see happening is the way that they're applying, like the outside of this thing is waiting. I think this is like a stucco product. But relative to the rest of the building, this one corner is taking a while. And it's been, finished smooth. These are the scuppers you can see coming from the upper roof down to the lower roof. So effectively, these are for in case this thing turns into a bathtub condition, which is it's quite literally full of water, has to get out somewhere. It's the same problem. You don't want, that's why bathtubs have them. You don't want it to overflow your house. You don't want it to overflow and ruin your building either. Same issue. So quickly here we go from not finished to finished. And I'm going to try to grab in between. It's got to be a good. I guess so. What the fact that we're having trouble sort of picking it out means that it happens quickly, the painting. And again, somebody has to get up there. So you can use these lifts to deliver material and move things around. It's just not easy to do. Anybody who's carried even a single sheet of plywood, let alone how many you have to go up here, it's difficult to access, and that's really the thing. And so this lift is up here. They probably sprayed this. They had masked this off, so they covered up the stuff they don't want to paint. You can see the sort of soffit that is being built for the canopy here. So, when I look at this, my question is, could you have done this wall in this section in a different way to avoid needing to frame your wall, put sheathing on the outside, do your prep coat, and then your final coat, and then your final paint? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's not even counting the actual structure of the building that this is going into, being framed inside of, usually, sort of attached to, I should say. And then is there a finish on the inside? I think what's happening is that some of this is probably different programmatic portions of the building that they wanted to be nicer, maybe. But what is the finish? Is it something you can see? Is it something that's actually drywall that needs to be finished on the inside? But either way, you've got layer. You've got between, call it at best 4, more like 5 to 7 layers. And that is often different trades. Structural steel, carpenters doing the sheathing and framing of the light gauge metal, exterior people doing stucco, and people doing paint. And then on the inside, if you have finishes there, again, you're talking about from a strategy point of view, we're trying to get from here, where we are today, to the goal at the end. And the more pieces in between us in that, the more things that could get messed up. It's not, and putting all your eggs in one basket, that has risk as well. But it also, you're just adding a lot of steps. And that's why so much of this sort of middle section, the framing this part of the building took just significantly longer to complete than the rest of it. And, while we were watching this go through, presumably the climbing walls are being installed as soon as it's reasonably weather tight and stuff like that. But just some things from a construction point of view, because my interest is always in, like, what is the minimum building we can build for the maximum result? And how can we build it as fast as possible with, again, the best result possible? These are two ends of a spectrum that we're trying to figure out how to bridge. And that's where strategic thinking on a project level is so critical, to have, your team being able to do that. Looking at the inside of this, again, using Instagram, Facebook, other articles, open to the public on the 7th. This is just a few days ago. This is a great little walkthrough. Very nice, the sort of touch point of the front desk. Um, you know, a lot of this is opinion. It looks nice. It's sort of right when you walk in. The concrete has been stained, probably to give it like a nice sort of uh, that sort of burnt color. This big hallway is going to get to a theme that I see throughout this building that is a little curious to me. This is saying that it's one of the biggest climbing gyms in Texas. There's also a lot of extra space from what I can tell. So it's a huge facility. And these little nooks, these are all very cool. It feels to me almost more like a university hallway than like a climbing gym hallway. Again, this sort of soul issue. I think this is actually a very nice gym, but when I see things like other than the fact that there's a climbing wall at the end of it, it reminds me of universities that I would teach in. And so when you get into the main climbing area, it's nice to have, you don't often see the concrete being stained like this since it was poured. This is a great example of actually all you're doing is adding some coloring to the concrete. It's not an expensive thing to color the concrete. So that's a nice way to make it a bit custom. And you can see the coordination between the windows and the climbing wall pretty close. Again, that this is a question for owners and the wall builders. And I know, as I work with owners and wall builders, sometimes owners want things that wall builders are not as comfortable with, whether it's a fall zone thing or a proximity thing to windows in this case or whatever. But these windows have all been put in ahead of time. You can see the lighting. The roof is painted black, which is interesting, some sort of black. Because generally we would do these white. It does give the walls a nice contrast as like a lighter gray. Again, windows coordinate with the climbing walls. You've got shorter climbing walls. You've got these taller you've got climbing walls on mezzanines, 55-foot walls, crack climbs, 130 rope anchors. Back in the day, I mean, it was the early 2000s when I was working for Eldorado Wall Company designing climbing walls, climbing gyms, but really specifically the walls. We used to care a lot about statistics. We used to talk a lot about how many lanes of climbing, how big, like what's the ratio, how much climbing, basically how much climbing can we fit in. It's very different now. I don't at all look at it that way, but I do use reference material. So we do keep track of things, at least in my way of working, because it is important to know this stuff because it does contextualize. Are we in the right ballpark? Are we missing something, etc.? But at the end of the day, it isn't. I can't tell you if that's the right number or not. It has a lot more to do with the feel of it. And so this mezzanine here, you can see the way that, so what we're doing here is we are looking at, and it makes sense on the outside here. I can't go back. We could see these windows in the YouTube time lapse, and we just a second ago were able to see the step up and step down. These are those windows, and just a second ago we were able to see the step down in the roof, which is basically right behind where we're looking at. So those are those windows. Oh, and we just saw the step down again. So this is going back towards the front desk. So back towards that front sort of chamfered corner. So there, the path through is sort of walking towards the front entry here, and then getting into, it's sort of cutting around. I believe this is next to the front hallway. So that long hallway that they have, you go from the entry towards, my understanding, entry, you sort of go around the front desk and basically down this long hallway. Fitness rooms on the sides, different things like that. We saw a mezzanine with climbing on top of it, at least in the taller section. I haven't been able to find floor plans of this, but I think that's what's going on. And so when we look at, again, still going through, you know, what do we think about this space? It's got fans, it's got lights, it's got air conditioning. It's got a rubber floor. It's mirrors. It's fine, right? I would say this is fine. It reminds me of um, it's a new clean building, and often this is what they look like when they're new and clean. You can see the stair going up. We saw this big opening on the side, and going into the other corner, which is this far corner, and see the window profile there. We're going to see that when we go into the yoga room here. So these are more almost like residential scale windows. Again, speakers, lighting, sprinklers, the whole deal. Pretty straightforward. Yes, it's spacious. Egress stair. This is if you take a turn and go into the locker rooms. Again, from spa quality locker rooms, still the concrete floor, which I think is smart. I would always want more drains, floor drains, especially in new construction. This is where operations feedback is very helpful. But we're up on the main mezzanine now, looking into the main part of the building. So we just walked from under the lower roof into the main area, and you can see again coordinated windows, mezzanine climbing walls, more tall walls. Absolutely. Here's a good image. Here we go. This is the step down between the taller and the lower section of roof. You can see different types of lighting. Again, black roof, which is an interesting choice. I like it. Yeah, it's just different a little bit, but there's no right or wrong answer in any of this. Mezzanine looking over. This is the step though. And this is an interesting, I think this view in itself, if you remember, we just came from a dead end mezzanine that had climbing wall on it. So this speed wall is not really facing anything. It's sort of facing, yes, you can see it from the mezzanine, but it's not facing like where I think you would have like a crowd for an event. Again, looking from the mezzanine, this isn't like a particularly steep lead wall, or like maybe this over here is, but again, and the bouldering being on the second floor like it is, or mezzanine. I say mezzanine because it's open. This is a code thing, but again, strategic. Is it a floor? Is it a mezzanine? Is it 2 floors? Is it 3 floors? Well, then we have to make it a floor, not it's like all these different things that go, or is it a mezzanine to the second floor? This is again why strategy is critical. But, from my point of view, when I see a layout like this, what it's telling me is that it's not like a competition focused layout for a facility, because I don't know where you would do viewing for a bouldering competition unless you did it on the main floor. I don't know where you would do viewing for, and you can just sort of see it as we scrub through here looking at the boulders. This all looks fine. There's a decent amount of bouldering. It doesn't look like that much bouldering for such a large facility. I love the tape, sandbagging in progress. A couple different boards. Nice, well put together, right? One last thing, just as we're wrapping up here. In an image like this, there's a couple different things you can see. So number one, setting a gym, especially a massive gym, takes a long time. So you need to be setting, and again, this is, from an ops point of view, like when can we get in? So we're doing all this work, we're planning the gym, we document the gym, we build the gym, construct it. At what point can ops come in? And then how can we deal with construction in a more strategic way so they can get in at a better time, maybe earlier, so that when we go to open this thing, maybe that, we're as prepared as we can be. But what can we do at each of these steps to help the next step, or help the one, a couple steps away? This is strategy. This is design, right? Like look at how small of a part that is. That's why Strategy, visualization, and support. That's why I focus on these things, because design without strategy is just a picture, and there's a lot of people who can do that. Strategic thinking for unique situations is what's going on here. So that's all just to say they're setting while walls are still being built. See the scaffolding in the back there? It's like aluminum or steel or galvanized or something like that. What can we see? That's all the scaffolding for the climbing wall. On the inside, they have put that sort of baggy stuff that we've all seen before, that sort of like loose, baggy stuff. It's very cheap. You can see this is the ceiling, and the roof structure. Maybe it wasn't painted. Maybe it was just left primer gray. This is ductwork. You can see a lot of these holes to try to allow for like low velocity distribution. You can see the speakers. You can see these are actually kind of interesting. So these are light wells that are, sort of these little skylights. Sometimes they even have mirrors to reflect light down to like create a much more stronger light than would normally be the case. But this picture to me, I think, is showing a few things. It's, number one, it's trying to, so ops, hiring. When can we do this? When can we get people in? I noticed they're doing hard hat tours. We did that in Somerville, 10, 12 years ago. That was, talk about figuring out liability and waivers with the builders and whatnot. Hiring, training, all these different things, setting that have to happen, before opening. Climbing gyms aren't that complicated, but they are very unique. And that's why, this picture I think is an interesting one, just because it shows a couple different things in progress. Going back to the Mesa Rim website, I hope the opening goes well. It's supposed to open on March 7th. This is a huge gym. They're saying it's the biggest in Texas, which I know things are big in Texas, so that's really saying something. And, it looks good. I appreciate that the climbing walls are not all sorts of colors. It's got a sort of European vibe to it. I know there are gyms in the States that are sort of singular colors as well that I'll look at some point. But for now, I think this is great. I'm glad to see things like this happening. I do agree. I think the sort of soul question is still a good one, because there's a lot of extra space in this from what I can tell. Really wide hallways, long hallways, different things like that, is it as efficient of a building? Like, you're paying for every square foot. Are we using every square foot the best way we can from a design point of view? Are we programming it the best way we can from an ops and business model point of view? And then are we building it in the best way possible to get it open sooner and be getting cash in the door? So good luck with everything, and I'll see you in the next video. If this is helpful, please like and subscribe, because that's a great way for me to know what's going on. Thank you.